Hello, my name is Steve Bruce. Thank you for inviting me to your Lenten retreat. We'll journey together for these few hours. I appreciate the invitation from Floyd Lalwit. Thank you, Floyd. And I appreciate the relationship that we have here at the Diocese of Los Angeles with the dioceses of the Philippines. I'm Steve Bruce from the Diocese of Los Angeles. I also serve as adjunct faculty with the Sisters of St. Joseph at their Center for Spiritual Development in Orange, where I teach spiritual direction. I mentor new directors. I lead some workshops, and I teach other courses related to Ignatian spirituality. The Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange are an Ignatian order. This center is associated with Loyola Marymount, which is a Jesuit university. So I have in my heart and in my DNA some love for Ignatius. I'm going to bring up screen sharing here, if you'll allow me to do this, because I want to present to you some slides. So what we're going to be doing, go back here, is we're going to be taking a journey on our Lenten retreat here. Let me bring up our map here. The journey is going to take us from Galilee through the Holy Land, through Jericho, through Judea, up to near Jerusalem at Bethany and Bethpage. So we're going to take a journey. We're going to stop in 5 places in this journey. And as a way of structuring our journey, we're going to use what Ignatius called imaginative prayer. So some of you may be familiar with Ignatius and his story. I did put his recovery story in your handout. Hopefully you've had a chance to read that full story. But essentially, he was wounded in a battle. He was a knight. He was wounded in a battle severely. His leg was severely injured. And during his recovery, he couldn't move much. And so he asked for some books to be brought to him, but there were no books in the castle where he was recovering. And except for a book on the life of Jesus and a book on the lives of the saints. And so those books came to him. And as a result, he read these books. And as the story goes, which I'll bring up this last paragraph here, which I want to read with you, he noticed a couple things when he was convalescing. I'm just going to read this real quick. And this is in bold in your handout. When he thought of worldly things, it gave him great pleasure. But afterward, he found himself dry and sad. But when he thought of journeying to Jerusalem and of living only on herbs and practicing austerities, he found pleasure not only while thinking of them, but also when he had ceased. So there's 2 great gifts from Ignatius in this story. The first is that he allowed himself to enter into stories in his imagination. So he imagined himself as this chivalrous knight, pleasing this princess, and all the things that he would do to please her. And then he imagined himself as sort of this austere monk on the road to Jerusalem, living off herbs and living the life of someone like St. Francis. And as this paragraph tells us, he noticed about his experience, he noticed that when he stopped daydreaming or imagining his chivalry story, it left him dry. It was not fulfilling for him. But when he stopped thinking and imagining and daydreaming about his Jerusalem self, he continued to be inspired and energized. Later, Ignatius would call this experience consolation, which in its strictest definition for him means being drawn closer to God. versus desolation, which is not being drawn closer to God or even being drawn away from God. So he noticed that he was being drawn to God. He was discerning. He was being drawn to God through this experience of imagining himself as a monk and later as a Jesuit, but not yet. So these are Ignatius's two great gifts. And so he incorporated this ability to imagine into his spiritual exercises, which he was develop later, and formalized sort of the prayer of the imagination. So if we look at this, this is in your handout as well. If we look at this, what we see is a method for using the imagination when reading the Gospels. So the steps, which I'll just quickly go through here, again, they're in your handout. Settle, meaning sit comfortably or go for a walk in a quiet place. Read the story, and there are going to be 5 stories throughout this retreat. Sit silently for a few minutes to bring in the story internally. Pray, ask God for grace to see something anew in these stories. And then enter into the story. Enter into the story. Entering means imagine yourself as a character in the story. Imagine yourself as Jesus or a disciple or a stranger. Even imagine yourself as someone who's not in the story, an observer. However you feel comfortable. But imagine that you're in that place. Imagine what it smells like. What are the sounds? Are there birds? Is there water? So really use your imagination to be there. And then begin to notice, what are you feeling? Are you feeling included, left out, resistant, attracted, sad? What are you feeling when you're in there? And then as you spend enough time in that story, begin to reflect. And then if you have a journal your reflections. If you're in a group of people, then have a conversation within your group about the reflection questions or about just reflecting how that experience was in the story for you. So the reflections are just a guide, but they're there for you to answer if you're so inclined. And then when you're done, thank God for the graces of this experience. And again, just sit silently. So that's the method. So before we begin, I would like to just say this prayer, which is the Suscipi prayer, originally attributed to Saint Francis. So let us pray. Take, O Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will. Whatever I have or hold, you have given me. I restore it all to you, and I surrender it wholly to be governed by your will. Give me only your love and grace, and I am rich enough and ask for nothing more. Amen. So we're going to begin in this part 1, which we're in, on a mountaintop. I'll bring up the map here. So you can see that we are on the Mount of the Transfiguration. There's some controversy about where that's at. Some say Mount Tabor, some say other mountains. It doesn't really matter. We're just imagining the experience. And so I've placed us just north of the Sea of Galilee on some mountaintop in order to just experience this beginning of the journey. So here's the story, which you're all familiar with. This is from Mark 9. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. So the reflection question that belongs to this story, what would you like to say to Jesus about your experience in this story? It is also on your reflection sheet that you have. So this is our first story. Imagine yourself in that location. If this picture helped you a little bit, great. But imagine yourself in that story. Look at the steps for the prayer of imagination. Enter into that experience. This should take around 40 to 45 minutes if you're reflecting and journaling and then sharing your experience out loud. But allow yourself to take time. Allow yourself to be in this story and to notice everything about the story. And then we'll see you in the next session. The next session will be visiting Capernaum. Blessings.